Hello and welcome back to Fairfax County Court. We've had our week away and now it's so lovely to be in that building once more. I didn't get into court this morning and this is why. This queue apparently started at around 7 p.m. last night, although there were some people saying that there were people here at 7 a.m. on Sunday morning. Anyway, I do know that some people who normally find themselves at the front of the queue were in the 50s, and one person who turned up at 1:45 this morning was outside the first 100 people queuing up. This story, this case, this trial has become national news and everyone wants a piece of it. You can have a debate about whether it's a good or bad thing that there are no journalists other than the pool reporter for Court TV sitting in the actual courtroom itself, but maybe that's for another day. Anyway, I did manage to interview two young women who queued up to get into court today. They are Mary and Vanessa, and we'll be hearing from them very shortly. I've also got a remote park bench interview with an attorney called Nicole Levitt, who works with victims of domestic violence. I have received a complaint that far too many of my interviewees are pro-Johnny Depp supporters. Now, many of the people who are in court, I've certainly not seen anyone today who's an Amber Heard supporter, and I would say the proportion is about 99 to 1, if that. I have yet to find in the last 2 weeks anyone who supports Amber Heard in and around court. So unfortunately, unless there are vocal and visible Amber Heard supporters who are going to come to court every morning, then I am not going to be able to interview any on the park bench for an immediate debrief of what it was like to be in the main courtroom. But I will try and get some more pro-Amber Heard supporters before this series finishes. However, that's not going to be the case today. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoy the conversation with Mary and Vanessa, and I'll be back in the middle to introduce Nicole. We're back from the 10-day break for another park bench interview, actually on a proper park bench. I'm delighted that Mary and Vanessa have joined me. They're not so delighted because they've been up for 36 hours. So I twisted their arm to come along and be interviewed. A little cranky. So First of all, let's talk about the queue experience. It seems to have got completely out of hand. I was able to get into court when this case first started.
Oh, like lining up last night?
Oh, yeah. So go on, what time did you arrive?
8:30ish, 8:15?
Yeah, 8:30 or 9 o'clock last night.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
And how many people were in the queue by the time you arrived?
We were, well, we have actually the numbers right here. You probably can't tell from the camera, but we were 76 and 77.
Yeah.
They had like a marker system at first, so that way people wouldn't like infiltrate and try to cheat their way in.
But apparently that was the first night they tried that.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't an official thing, so it kind of got screwed up.
Was it the deputies who were marking your hands?
No, and I didn't know that because this is my first time here. So I was number 77, but I ended up being number 76.
So was this like a self-policing thing that was going on?
It was kind of, yeah, and it was
we were
kind
trying
of
to be
organized,
peaceful
actually.
and organized about it.
Yeah.
And we were trying to have an honorary system so that way no one would ruin it for anybody. Because, I mean, we knew the deputies were going to show up and the sheriffs, and we didn't want to cause any fights and, you know, ruin it for everyone and get us all booted off the property. So we were trying to make an honorary system, and of course someone has to start a fight. The sheriffs and the deputies come in and they try to organize their own system and mess ours up.
It wasn't even a fight. Someone got here late because there was already 100 people here, and they called, like, saying that someone got into a fight. So then, like, they came out saying they probably did have official orders saying that we weren't allowed to be there till 1.
That's the rule. That's the rule as I understood it. Yeah.
We were all in a line, like, and we had our numbers on, and they like all pushed us off to the side, and then people like joined in the line, and then people cut, and it was a little chaotic at like 2 a.m.
But you got in.
Yes.
Thankfully.
And tell me what your experience was like of seeing Amber Heard in the stand and how the day went from your perspective. Because there was an awful lot of information to take in, because court days are an hour longer at least going forward.
I'm a bit ahead of myself, but I really like how the day finished.
So we finished with the cross-examination. Do you want to talk about that first? So go on, take us through the cross-examination.
I just think it kind of shows like her hypocrisy.
Go on.
Well, the big
Are
one.
you talking about the donation?
Yeah, that's
Right,
the big
Explain
one.
the donation. This is because Amber Heard said she donated $7 million
Yes.
of her divorce settlement, i.e. the entirety of her divorce settlement.
And
she said it on Danish television, didn't she? Very explicitly, she had donated
said
that amount.
donated.
And now she said, oh, I only meant pledged.
And then she's like, I consider pledging and donation the same thing, and they're not.
And it was just consistent bickering between the lawyer and Amber Heard.
There was Camille Vasquez who was doing the cross-examination for Johnny Depp's team. There was a lot of toing and froing, wasn't there?
Absolutely.
So what was that like to experience that?
It was very surreal. I was so glad that Amber was finally caught in the act of her own lies. I was talking to it with other members who were watching in the queue with me. Like, she's probably told so many lies that she can't even remember what she's told. And she just got stuck in the web.
Her view is that she was never going to donate the $7 million all at once. She was going to donate it in stages for tax efficiency, and she stopped donating when she was sued by Johnny Depp.
Well, after he had already donated, what was it, 100 million, and then Elon...
100,000.
100,000. Yep, sorry. And then
You're going to have to
Elon
forgive
Musk.
these people for any mistakes they make on camera.
Absolutely.
They've been up a very, very long time. 100,000.
Yes, sorry. And then Elon Musk with however much he donated.
Yeah.
So you guys
And
are
she
Johnny Depp supporters. You've come here to support Johnny Depp.
100%.
Yes, and she
Honestly, more.
And we heard a litany of abuse that Johnny Depp has allegedly meted out on Amber Heard before we got to cross-examination. Very, very detailed, very, very clear about what she believes happened to her, and very, very robust in her responses about the abuse. I agree, less robust about the definition of donate and pledge.
Yeah.
What do you think about what she was saying about the length of abuse that she was subjected to and the sustained nature of it?
The evidence didn't match. There wasn't any evidence. And she contradicted herself by saying, oh, well, I would love to show these photos to the jury, but there were no photos to show. I mean, I just thought that was very interesting, and especially when her attorneys, especially during the cross-examination, they just seemed to stall because there were just so much, like, large lengths of time where it was just white noise for everyone else because they didn't know what to do. They were scrambling. They were, honestly, I mean, for lack of a better word, they were shook.
So where does this leave you after watching this day of evidence in the flesh? Because presumably you've been following this on television, which is one of the... Because this is your first time, isn't it, in court since the beginning of this trial?
Kind of.
So how does being in the courtroom, or does it change in any way your perception of the way this trial is going?
I always had my faith in Johnny, but being in the room and feeling like the emotions in the room, seeing expressions on people's faces in like live action, it is totally different than seeing it on a screen. Because, you know, on a screen you get to boo and hiss and, you know, cheer for everyone, but in court you have to take this seriously because, I mean, you are in court. You have to act as if you're in court and truly listen. I feel like if you're on a screen you get to selectively listen and, you know, just bicker like, oh, I don't like her, I don't like him, and a bunch of he said, she said. But in the court you have to look at the facts, listen to the stories, and you truly get a concept of each side instead of just selectively listening to the one you want to hear.
And did you get a chance to see how the jury were reacting in this at all, or were you not sitting?
Unfortunately, I couldn't see.
So you were on Johnny Depp's side, were you?
Yeah,
Okay.
kind of in the corner. I could see like 2 people.
Okay.
I saw them taking notes, but that was about it.
Right. Okay. They're very impassive, the jury.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that in this
case.
case.
I saw a few more faces, and they were very.
I've never
serious
watched the
with
jury
them.
before because we're not allowed to do that in the United Kingdom. So I'm learning that skill over here. And a lot of people who are experienced jury watchers are saying they're very, very impassive. You can't read them. So you wouldn't want to draw any conclusions from what they were hearing as well. But at least you got the same experience as the jury.
Yes, absolutely.
So are you confident that the jury are going to come to the right conclusion?
I believe so.
I hope so.
And you think the right conclusion is Johnny Depp winning? So you think the jury are going to find for Johnny that he was defamed?
I hope so. I 100,000,000% believe in Johnny. I have been a supporter of him always, and I just think karma will give people what they deserve in the end, whether it be good or bad.
And I'm so amazed by people's absolute certainty in this, because of course the thing about it is that none of us were there. No one knows what happened behind closed doors for real.
That's true.
Yeah, that is true, but there is a lack of evidence that's kind of raising eyebrows and other questions.
And when you say lack of evidence, does this mean the description that Amber Heard is giving about the injuries she sustained and the beating she sustained is not borne out by the photographs that we've seen in court?
That
Or-
and
or
just the
what?
timelines aren't lining
So
up.
far, Amber Heard's word has been like disproven more often than Johnny's.
It just doesn't match up. The photos don't match the dramatization I feel that Amber is giving. And I just feel like that has really, like, just being in court has really opened my eyes to seeing that. Because I feel like if I was watching it on a screen, I would kind of just, like, surpass all the pictures and stuff. But now, like, I was looking at it, I don't see anything that she needed to prove, because she was so adamant about, oh well, I needed to prove, you know, that this has happened to me, this is my story, this is what Johnny did to me. But I didn't see any proof of anything. I saw what could be, you know, attempts to confirm and validate her story, but I don't see concrete evidence that is against Johnny's favor.
Okay, but so, I mean, things like the scratches on her arm, which were focused in on earlier in the day, I was racking my brains to come back into remember exactly what we went through, but there was a lot of focus and attention given to those scratches on her arm. I mean, she says they were sustained when she was in the middle of being sexually abused by Johnny in Australia. I mean, I don't think anyone's denying those scratches are there.
Yeah.
No.
But you're not buying that story.
No, because especially now with, you know, special effects makeup really being creative and coming out into play, especially in Hollywood, of all places, in LA, it's easy to just make up. I think even just any average person who doesn't have the money to have all this fancy makeup can pull it off. And I mean, from watching this in the past, she claimed that she used a specific makeup brand to help with covering up all her injuries. And that specific company, clapped back and said, no, that's not true at all. We didn't even have this that time that she alleged.
Yeah. Well, I think that was her counsel making a mistake. If I'm being generous to her, she was waving around the one brand. What other mistakes have you spotted?
Like I said, today I never realized how much they stole. And especially, the one that is very viral on TikTok right now, this whole, the objection hearsay from, I believe it's Rottenborn, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that's his name.
Ben Rottenborn.
And, he called hearsay to his own question. That's the main thing that's
going
going
sorry, no,
viral right now.
He objected to his own question.
Yeah.
Well, still.
I don't know whether that was Ben Rottenborn. Forgive me, I'm getting confused now. That was a long time ago. Seems like a long time ago.
I know.
But what you were saying about makeup, I mean, given how good makeup is nowadays, can it not just cover a multitude of bruises and problems in the way that she seems to be pretty conversant in how to cover up bruises, which.
Yeah.
You could also make them as easily as you can cover them up.
I just really wonder, if she's gonna take the time and have our friend help her, take pictures of these soft red spots. You could have more concrete evidence if you also took a picture of all these dark bruises and bloody injuries she's claiming to have. And if she's taking the time to take some of these pictures, where are the other pictures? Why? Yeah. I just have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I think we all do, and I think we will continue to have a lot of questions until the verdict comes through.
Just the beginning.
Just a final sort of word on your experience and how you're feeling now, because I know
exhausted.
So you've been up for 36
Sleepy.
hours. Sleepy.
Maybe more. I'm not really sure at this point.
Yeah. What are you going to do now?
Go home and sleep.
Dinner.
You're going to come back?
We're debating.
See, I'm very much debating. I actually have to go out of state in a few days to go visit family, but I'm also kind of debating on pushing that back so I can come back here again.
Wow, that's commitment.
This experience is just so thrilling. It was more thrilling than I thought it would be. Because at first,
I'm not sure Mary agrees.
Oh my God, Johnny Depp waved her direction. I feel like she almost fainted.
I almost did, yes. Well, I came here a few weeks ago with another friend of mine, and we were just running down towards the gate, and we were just gonna flag Johnny down, we love you, while he was driving into the gate. And that was just one thing. I was just for the past few weeks that this trial has been going on, I'm just I'm definitely gonna do that, because I only live an hour away. And it's just one of those things I keep thinking, oh, I'll do that, and I never end up doing. And I did it. So then I said, well, now I'm going to camp out and go see the trial. And I thought I wouldn't do it, and I did it. So
who knows what more you might be able to achieve?
I know. Who knew that if you actually achieve your goals, you can feel accomplishment? Who knew?
Ladies, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I know how tired you are, and I'm very grateful to you for doing this interview. I appreciate it.
We appreciate the opportunity very much. It was a great experience. Thank you.
Well, my thanks to Mary and Vanessa. They have no truck with any of Amber Heard's arguments, and they don't really like her legal team either. I think that much is clear. They had possibly made up their minds before they went in there, but there was nothing that was changing it from what they saw in the flesh in the live courtroom today. Coming up then, a pre-recorded remote park bench interview with Nicole Levitt. I recorded this, I think, on Friday morning. I was just trying to put some remote park bench interviews in the bank, so obviously it doesn't refer to what happened today, week 5, day 17 of evidence. but it's more of a generic overview of her experience working with victims of domestic violence and why, on this occasion, she appears to be supporting Johnny Depp.
So I represent domestic violence victims in court, and I'm fascinated by the interest in this case and the interest on both sides and people kind of taking sides in the case. However, the main point of this case is it's a defamation trial. So both parties have a really high burden of proof, of proving that the other party acted with actual malice in making defamatory statements about them. It's not actually a trial about domestic violence, although the allegations are centered on domestic violence.
Yeah, and it does, obviously the allegations help to build the case for truth, which then help to make the case for defamation. And that's why we're spending so much time on the actual truth behind the alleged defamation. But just explain that point, because I think there are a lot of people who may miss that in the noise that we're getting out of the trial, that even if Johnny Depp can prove to a jury through the evidence presented that Amber Heard is lying or fantasizing about the allegations she made against him, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to win his case.
No, it doesn't. Did they have actual malice is also part of this. Did they knowingly make these false statements? And
did he suffer serious harm to his reputation as a result?
That I think is easier to prove,
right?
Because it looks like he did. It's harder for her to prove that, in my opinion, but she hasn't entered in all of her evidence yet, so we'll see.
And when you look at this case and the evidence that's been coming out and relate it to your own practice and your own experience of dealing with domestic violence cases, what parallels and what conclusions are you drawing?
So the parallel is that domestic violence occurs in all walks of life, all socioeconomic spheres, all races, genders, ethnicities. It doesn't leave any sphere untouched. But this case is so Hollywood. It's so unusual. It seems like these people were never alone. There was always some kind of staff member around. And that's not the norm with a regular domestic violence case. My practice actually centers in a large urban city, and the victims are very, very different. The stories are very different. Sometimes there's no correlating physical evidence to a domestic violence claim, and so the judge is left to just determine credibility of each party and assess the story and see if which party met their burden of proof. Here,
and that must be fantastically difficult to do. I mean, it's difficult enough in this case where you have, as you say, plenty of witness evidence, because these people were very rarely left alone, and also documentary evidence. There are recordings which they made whilst they were arguing. So how does the justice system deal with domestic violence when it isn't Hollywood, when it is in situations that you're dealing with, which are your bread and butter every day? How difficult is it to get the right decision, and how much skill and knowledge has to be brought to bear on each situation?
It's incredibly difficult. But where I've seen it really work is when the judge is paying attention to the testimony, careful attention, when the attorneys bring it out carefully. And oftentimes it's a word that's said or not said. It is the demeanor a party has in court. Something that happens during the testimony that makes the judge believe it's more likely that, that the party met their burden by, let's say, 51, 52%. But like you said, it's very difficult in those cases. Now, usually you do have some type of physical evidence. You have a medical report, you have photos, you have a police report, some kind of witnesses. Sometimes you'll have a recording. But in my state, which is a two-party consent state, you need the consent of both parties to video anything and then play the audio in court. There is a domestic violence exception that if you reasonably believe that a crime is about to be committed against you, a crime of violence, that you can then, let's say, tape it or film it. But normally you can't just go around filming someone else.
I'm interested in what you said about the judge picking up on clues, or could be simple lines, or the demeanor of a witness in court, or a defendant or plaintiff, and of course that's what happened in the United Kingdom with the Johnny Depp v NGN trial. The judge was left to make his decision on the basis of what he saw over 3 weeks worth of evidence, and came down firmly in Amber Heard's favour. Now, there are plenty of people who will tell you that that was a travesty of a decision, but it shows that these decisions have to be left to a skilled person to make when you're only dealing with a judge and not a jury, and also how life-changing they can be. I mean, the burden
Yes.
on the judge and the attorneys, if they get this wrong, that you're changing someone's life, because a court's decision is usually binding.
Yes, and the wrong decision can be made, and has been made in many cases. So you're
I mean,
right,
does that
it's
sort of thing keep
extreme.
you awake at night?
It does. It does. Now,
How do you mitigate against it?
how do you mitigate against that? So my agency where I work, we have lethality factors that have to be met before we take clients. And so we're pretty sure that they actually were victims of domestic violence before we take them. That doesn't mean we're going to win all our cases, but for us, it does mitigate against representing someone saying they're victims of domestic violence when they're not. Now, the other way to mitigate against that is, full interviews of your clients and their stories, and being honest with them about how it's likely to be taken in court, about the strengths and weaknesses of their case.
Are any of your clients ever men? Do you, and if they are, do you find that the court system is less inclined to believe them, or in some way slanted against them?
So sometimes I also represent victims in custody hearings, and sometimes allegations of domestic violence are viewed by judges and other attorneys, other parties, as just being brought up so that they have an edge in custody. And, that's something that we always have to fight, because in Pennsylvania, one of the factors, there are 16 factors that a judge has to consider in determining whom to grant custody to. And issues of domestic violence is one of the 16 factors. So that has to be proven in a custody case. And it is looked at a little skeptically, like, okay, you're doing this to get a leg up in your custody case, sometimes.
But what about, I don't know whether you've had any male victims of domestic violence come through your offices. Have you had to represent anyone alleging that? And how do you think the court system tends to view men who are making those allegations?
So I haven't represented any men, but I know that my agency has. And I think that it's harder for men to prove domestic violence, because there's a natural skepticism of, okay, she's 5'3", you're 6'1". How did she abuse you? How could you not get away? The other issue is control, like which party had control in the relationship. Was one party, dominating the finances, the children, the medical decisions, stuff like that, in addition to physical violence or threats. So there's a lot that will be looked at, and I think that judges are more skeptical of claims made by men.
Have you ever had a client or potential client who you think was making things up, or someone who you've started to represent and then thought, hang on a minute, this person is not credible? Is it ever sort of cut and dried like that, or how does that, where does that go when you if you get that inkling that you might not be representing someone who's telling the truth?
So I have to have an honest discussion with them about what they're telling me and how it sounds to me. And it's not an easy discussion to have with the client, but it
And
has
why
to
they're
be
telling
had.
it to you.
Yes, it has to be had. And sometimes it's simply a matter of the way the brain processes traumatic events. The brain doesn't process it in a linear fashion, and it's not stored that way. So sometimes the way it comes out is not linear, and it can be confusing. But if there's something that outright contradicts what was said before, that's kind of a red flag, and it's something that needs to be explored with the client.
Has that ever got to a point where you thought, I can't represent this person because I'm not sure whether they are telling the truth or not?
No, because my talks with the clients worked. I haven't gotten to the point where the client just wants to go against my advice. And in that case, I would part ways with them.
Okay. So bearing in mind everything you've told me about what a complex and difficult job you have to do, how are you viewing Depp v. Heard so far? We've had 4 weeks of evidence, and we've also had Amber Heard on the stand.
So far, I believe that Amber Heard is not coming across as very credible. Her claims are really over the top and outrageous, and she doesn't have any physical evidence really to back up those outrageous claims. And I feel that there's something very incongruent in the emotional affect that she gives off while she's on the stand. And I think that's something that a jury might pick up on. That being said, that doesn't mean that Johnny Depp is going to win his case.
But that's really interesting, because going back to what you said, yes, this is a defamation case and not a domestic violence case. But you, with all your experience of dealing with victims of domestic violence, you're not seeing the credibility in Amber Heard that you see in the people that you represent. Can you pick that apart a little more?
Yes, like I said, her claims are really over the top, and her evidence doesn't seem to back it up. In addition, there are a lot of other witnesses that have already testified. They didn't see any evidence of her claims. They didn't see this bruising. They didn't see or hear her being abused. And one thing that was very telling to me was the audio of the Australia incident where his finger got chopped off. You can hear her say, like, I didn't mean to do it, something to that effect. I didn't mean to hurt him. So, that's kind of contradicting her testimony.
Do you believe that there is such a thing as mutual abuse? Could this have been such a toxic relationship that one person will fly off the handle and start the abuse, and then another time another person will fly off the handle and start the abuse? I have to tread carefully around this, because I've been told that even the phrase mutual abuse can be triggering, because abusive partners have used it as an accusation against their victims in order to try and shift the blame for what was happening onto them. But where do you stand on that?
It has been used by abusive partners to shift the blame, but it's also true that in a toxic relationship, there can be mutual combat, and there often is. So in a domestic violence case, you have to, or a judge, a fact finder, has to figure out, was someone the primary aggressor here? Or is this just a case of a toxic relationship and they both abused each other? Here, I don't think we have to find out who is the primary aggressor. We just have to see if their claims of abuse on both sides are true or false, and if each party made claims of abuse knowing they were false.
If we get to a point, I mean, I don't know whether we can do too many hypotheticals because your head will start to spin, but
Yeah.
if we get to a point where the jury believe that there was abuse on both sides, and then they have to sort of funnel that through a lens of whether or not it's defamatory that Amber Heard
wrote that op-ed, or the other counterclaim, which we really haven't explored yet in this trial so far, which what you'd expect will come out over the next 2 weeks. Does the jury just have to be convinced that there was one act in which Johnny Depp was the aggressor in order to make out the case for truth in the Amber Heard op-ed, and therefore the claim that he's making fails? Or is it more complicated than that?
It's probably more complicated than that, but it's definitely possible that the jury could say there was one act of abuse here, so she's not lying. There was one act of abuse here, so he's not lying.
I see. And I mean, that's the sort of thing that I've been thinking all along, that one of these parties is lying. But I'm now starting to wonder whether actually that it's that black and white, whether the truth of the matter is going to lie buried in between somewhere. And it's a sort of difficult job for the jury to try and extricate it from what they're allowed to hear. I mean, one thing, I don't know whether you take the same view, but it seems to me that the jury is actually going to be making their decision based on far more limited information than is already in the public domain, because of the way that evidence is funneled through the courts by the agreement of both parties and then the judge before it can actually be seen by the jury. And because they won't have access to transcripts, they've only got their own notes. They are kind of making a decision based on largely their impressions of what they saw and heard in court. Is that an ideal system?
Yes, I think it is. I think that we don't want a jury to be swayed by public opinion. In America, we've had a few big cases like that. And the big fear was that the jury was afraid of public opinion. And that's why they made the decision they made. Here, though, they're not sequestered. And I'm wondering, how is it possible, especially in this off week, for them to not hear anything about this trial, because it's kind of blown up. Like, it's so Hollywood.
They have got a former US Navy Marine reading them the riot act every time they finish for the day. I'd take her seriously.
Yeah, I would take her seriously too, but she's not following them around every day. Like, they turn on their computer and the news feed comes up. So how easy is it for them, or how difficult is it for them to avoid all mention of this trial?
Just one question. If the jury decide that for whatever reason Johnny Depp was not defamed and his action fails, there has been so much information that has reached the public domain. I mean, you've called it in favor of him. You don't think that Amber Heard is a credible witness. Where would he go from here if a jury on one side of the Atlantic and a judge on the other decided that essentially he was a wife beater, yet there is this huge swell of public opinion in his favor? What happens to Johnny Depp going forward?
So I think that one of his main reasons for bringing this suit was to sort of redeem his public image. And I think that he's done that. I think that so far in this trial, he's successfully managed to do that. He's come across, definitely, he has alcohol and drug issues, and they definitely had a toxic relationship. So none of that looks good. But if he can come out of this trial with people, the general public, believing he's not a wife beater, he's won.
Even if the jury disagree? Because they might be making a decision on the defamation issue, not on the DV issue.
Yes.
Well, they have to make the decision on the defamation issue.
Let's hope they do. Yes.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. It's been really great to talk to you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nick. It's nice talking to you as well.
My thanks to Nicole, and my thanks to Vanessa and Mary before that. I hope you have enjoyed another remote park bench interview back at Fairfax County Court. First day of 4 this week over, a very, very long day. Went from 9 in the morning all the way through to 5:30 this afternoon, and I think that's going to be the pattern for the rest of the week. I have to go back and write a newsletter, so if you want to subscribe to the newsletter and support my work, please go to reportingdeppvheard.net/newsletter, and for a small donation you can get on a perhaps more considered and rounded overview of the day's events as I was able to perceive them. And yes, I'd be very grateful for your support in that regard. If you'd rather just watch these Reporting Depp v. Heard videos or listen to the Reporting Depp v. Heard podcast, I would be equally grateful for your eyeballs and ears. But that concludes this one for today. I'll be back with another one on day 18 of this epic, lengthy trial.